Good afternoon. As the slide says, I'm Frederick Mbuya from Tanzania, and I'm the founder of Uhuru Labs, which is a startup in Tanzania dealing in technology, and a founding member of African Drone, which is a Pan-African drone network. This is just a quick slide to let you know, and everyone already knows, that drones are on the increase in use in the world. They're on the increase mostly because of the rapidly reduction in their price and the rapidly reduction in complexity. And one thing we should be clear about here is what we're talking about is not commercial drones, but these kinds of drones which you see here on the side. The top one, I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. It's DJI and is very, very popular. It costs around $1,000. The second one is what is considered more of a commercial survey level drone, and its orders of magnitude is more like $15,000, $20,000. And the bottom one is a crop of drones which we are seeing on the increase these days called VTOL. It's a hybrid, and if there's time in the end, I might say a few words about that. Why are drones relevant to Africa? Well, there are a number of reasons why I think drones are extremely important to Africa, or the potential that drones bring could be important to Africa. And I'm going to be going through basically three core use cases. This is a comic that I often use. I still don't know the author, but I think it's extremely powerful. You have a chief on one end saying land is key to fighting poverty. We had someone earlier on in the day who said that, who was making out that two of the most important things in economic development are your land and your people. And you have the people here saying, how can we fight poverty when we don't know, when our land is not secured? The first thing for securing land is surveying it. And that's a huge problem in Africa. This is a figure which is very telling. Only 3% of Africa is mapped to a local level. Now, when you accept that land is extremely critical to lifting Africa out of poverty, then you have to also accept that getting it mapped, getting it enumerated is critically important. Another issue which is facing Africa is the issue of transportation and logistics. This is what many roads look like in Africa, or even worse. They are available and workable during the dry season if you're lucky. Another very startling statistic is that only 34% of Africa's rural population live within 2 kilometers of an all-weather road. When you contrast that with the rest of the world, and the rest of the world, not Europe or the West, but the rest of the world, where there's 90% of people live within 2 kilometers of an all-weather road, you understand the logistical problem that many African people are experiencing. And the third is third use case is in remote sensing, and in this I'm specifically talking about agriculture. There was an African Union commissioned report that was done by high-level African leaders and innovation experts to find out what are the technologies which could potentially help Africa in the next 5 to 10 years. And of 20 or so technologies, 3 were selected, and one of those 3 was drones. And the African Union has decided and is advising other African governments to capitalize on their use of drones because they have recognized that they have the ability to perhaps help. So all of those use cases those were the 3 use cases which I think can help. But I'm a very practical person. I'm a technology person, and I like to deal in evidence, actually, what has been done. So I'm going to go through a number of use cases, mostly in Tanzania, where I'm from, and mostly which I've been involved in, but cases where drones have actually been piloted, used, and have had what I consider a positive outcome. The first was in the support of a land tenure program that was DFID funded in Tanzania, in a rural area of Tanzania. The project, unfortunately, was initially designed to use satellite imagery for the digitization of rural plots of land. The project team very quickly realized that actually the resolution which they could acquire from satellite imagery was not sufficient to digitize the plots of land which we're after, because not after large plot swathes of land, but very small parts of land. And so they asked if drones could be used as a test to see, could drone imagery be then taken back to the office and then used to digitize these plots of land and then issue titles. I have a number of photographs up here which, again, and other people have also made the point that in order for something like this to work, you have to include all the stakeholders. The stakeholders here are government, COSTECH, which is the Commission of Science and Technology, so research institutions, going over the maps. When in the field, these are the owners themselves of the land. And I don't have a video, but it'd be great to show. There was a woman who came up while we were doing this work, and without any prompting was saying, this is excellent, because one of the main issues we have are problems with border disputes, and even more so, if I don't have a title, I can't go to a bank and get a loan. So they were very excited. And there we have us in the field actually using drones to do the work. And this is the kind of product which we had coming out. As you can see, parcels of land are clearly identifiable and can be digitized then back in the office. And again, a photograph of all of us, again, identifying the fact that we have researchers, this is from the Ministry of Lands, we have youth, and we have the local people themselves. So this kind of thing cannot be possible without the involvement of everybody. Secondly, you may all have already heard about this project. It's the Zanzibar Mapping Initiative. It was an idea to see if the island of Zanzibar could be mapped using small-scale drones. To put it into context, in around 2004, a similar job was done using manned aircraft, which came from Kenya or South Africa, I'm not sure, and cost approximately $2.5 million. The budget for this project was between $250,000 and $300,000. But we cheated a little bit in that we used 15 students and 4 government surveyors to do the majority of the work. These are people who were trained up and went out and did all the data collection and then did all the data processing. And for me, that's really how it needs to be done, because it means in the future when this needs to be updated, they are the ones who are going to do it. I'll say a little bit more about this project towards the end, I think. This is a bit of the output from that project. On a GeoNode, it's released as open data. But again, I want to say a little bit more about the data and the issues we are having with the data a little bit later. This other use case is really where I think the importance of including private companies in the country in which you operate is important, because they are the ones with a vested interest to continue the work. So although at the time of the Zanzibar mapping project, I was a World Bank consultant, I very often told the students that I am being very selfish in what I'm doing here. I am making sure that you guys are skilled up so that you can come and work in my private company as drone operators and surveyors. So this is an example of a piece of work that was done by my private company, subsidized by my private company as public work. Not funded by the World Bank or any other donor organization, but funded by the people who are living actually in the area themselves. So they are the ones who contributed the money to get the surveys done. And one of the products is this. So as you can see, it's probably not too clear for you, but high enough resolution imagery to be able to digitize the land, and they are now in the process of issuing titles. This is where I think such technology has to go. It has to go beyond a donor project. It has to go beyond a pilot. It has to be embraced by private operators within the countries themselves, and they have to see profit, and they'll be able to continue. This is another example of the type of work which we have done in Dar es Salaam. We heard people speaking about how we need to go 3D. This is imagery collected by drones and rendered of Dar es Salaam. I like to use this because very often when you see high-resolution imageries of Africa, it's of rural or poorer areas. I don't think there are many other African cities that have a 3D rendering of the quality of Dar es Salaam, and that has been done by local surveyors using local workforce. And lastly, unfortunately, these are just pictures of myself and one of the girls who was trained in Zanzibar. The reason I can't use the client's photographs here is this is in the mining sector. But it's to underline the fact that in order for these companies to be successful, they have to be multidisciplinary. They have to be servicing the traditional survey sector, but they also have to be servicing the commercial sector. So, for example, my high-value clients are in the mining sector, and that is what allows me to subsidize more public works. There's been a lot going on in Africa when it comes to drones and specifically in agriculture. I'm going to have another slide later on which shows a network of operators. But again, the point I'm trying to highlight here is in order for such technology to be adopted properly and efficiently and sustainably, it has to service several sectors. It cannot only service the land survey sector, it has to service the agriculture sector, the mining sector, etc. And what has been done with these maps so far? Here we see, this is actually from a World Bank project where the data which has been used, collected by UAVs, has then gone back to create inundation maps. So this is an extremely practical use. Many African cities, most of the major African cities, suffer from seasonal flooding. It's a problem in our rapidly developing urban environment. We don't have the money to be calling over manned aircraft to do surveys every year, but what we do have is the ability to operate drones to collect this imagery rapidly and react to it. What you see on this side here is one of the rivers which passes through Dar es Salaam. And this is what happens pretty much on a bi-yearly basis. Now, the only way for us to be able to alleviate this is to get accurate maps, accurate elevation data, and plan our cities appropriately. And we can only do that if we can collect the data ourselves. Another use case for some of the data which is being collected, Twaro is Swahili, which means adopted rain. As I said, flooding is often a major problem in urban environments in Africa. Often that flooding is due to poor water flows. There might be a drain, but it's blocked. So this is using the high-resolution imagery to demarcate drains and then urge the local community themselves to adopt a part of the drain. And then when there's perhaps a storm warning or a rain warning, the message goes out to that person saying, is your part of the drain clear? What I'm trying to highlight here is the data has to be used in many different ways. And the last use case I'll be talking about with drones is in logistics. So we saw earlier on the roads which are totally flooded. Just last month, we had in Tanzania the Lake Victoria Challenge. The idea behind this challenge was to test regulations. So we've been doing a lot of work in Tanzania so far with drones, and we've come very far. But the only way, for example, to get private investment for businesses to grow is for there to be good regulation and regulations in place which allow people the freedom to invest. If someone's going to invest $100,000 or $200,000 in a drone fleet, they have to be confident that the following year they're going to be able to operate those drones legally. The Lake Victoria Challenge was aimed at, and is still aimed at, testing those boundaries. So some highlights from it were, we were flying less than 2 kilometers away from an airport. Now, anyone who operates drones knows that that's unheard of in most of the world. We were flying beyond visual line of sight, which again is unheard of in many countries in the world. And we were testing UTM systems, so UTM in the sense of Universal Traffic Management Systems, which are only now coming onto the market but are critical for the safe operations of drones. We had in attendance teams from all over, from Sweden, from America. We hope next year we'll have a Finnish team. And the point of this drone here is not really to show that it doesn't look as impressive as the other ones, but this drone is something which was put together during the competition because we recognize the need to be able to also industrialize this industry in Tanzania. And it looks like it's a piece of bamboo, but it actually satisfied a need during the expo, in that this white thing that you see on top of it is an ADSB transponder. It's something which allows air traffic control to see our drones on the same screen that they can see other aircraft. It's something which not even all manned aircraft in Tanzania are mandated to have yet, but we mandated for all our drones in this competition to have. Thank you. I should say thank you.
Thank you, Frederick. It was a fantastic illustrations and description of all the applications that you really can do with the drones, and I think it's an amazing technology, really. And I think it's also that you can have a participatory process with the private sector involved and also the local citizens. So thank you very much. Do we have any questions to Frederick?
Thank you very much. You don't have a history, but you begin at a high level, which is very impressive. And going back to the basics, what you really need, you try to do. So do you think that the Western world is doing too much? Are we collecting too much data?
I actually said during the presentation that I'm going to say something about the data, and that is one of the problems which we're having right now. The Zanzibar initiative was a huge success in the collection of the data, but to date, I would say that the only real outcome has been the training of some of the students and the surveyors. To date, the data has not been used, in my opinion, in practical use. Part of the problem is people are not accustomed with dealing with such large, detailed data sets. We don't have the systems in place yet, so the SDI, for example, in place to manage the data, to share the data. So I actually think that right now, drones are ahead of the curve in collecting the data, and the infrastructure has to play a lot of catch-up.
Any more questions?
I think those were words of wisdom, what you just said. I actually think that surveying and mapping is no longer the bottleneck it used to be historically. And I don't think any more accuracy, for example, is as big bottleneck as we have spoken today. I think those start to be historical things, but the institutional governance problems remain as the real bottleneck. But I think I wanted to make a comment on the heights and the floods and so on. And I think this is stemming from our work at the World Bank on resilience of land records and resilience of geospatial infrastructure. And what we are working towards in that context is that future cadastral mapping should be also about heights, because that is perhaps the most funded exercise today that goes into rural areas and poor areas, and the height information is needed for the resilience. So we would need to combine heights to the future cadastral mapping.
Yeah, that's quite true, and I was pleased. One of the earlier presenters who was showing his drone, I've already met up with him, and one of the issues which we have with drones is you usually cannot penetrate, for example, the mangroves, and we're looking for a partnership with them for LiDAR units. Exactly.